Hey guys, we're here outside the U.S. Capitol building where the 58th Presidential Inauguration will take place in just a few hours. For weeks we've been calling and emailing our Arizona congressmen trying to set up interviews with them. Well, yesterday we were very fortunate to talk with some of them. The full interviews are posted on the website, but here's some of the highlights. You're a Republican, and during President Obama's first term, you were in the House, and over the past 4 years, you've been in the Senate. What differences do you anticipate now that a Republican is going to be president?
Well, I think that the president will now sign the legislation we passed a little more often. President Obama vetoed legislation that we passed, and having a Republican now in the White House and having a Republican House and Senate, it's easier to pass legislation.
What changes do you think need to happen in education?
Well, I think the most important thing that we can do is to realize that no one loves those children more than mom and dad, or mom or dad, in single-parent families. And sometimes we allocate these decisions to bureaucrats who don't even know the children's names. So the most important thing we can do for education is to empower the parents to have the best options that they possibly can, to be able to afford it, to be able to access it, and they're going to do the best they can for their children, and that's ultimately going to work out, I think, the best for everyone.
You just began your fourth term as a United States Representative for Phoenix, Arizona's 6th District, which is where North Point is located. What are some issues you're going to be addressing in Washington on behalf of us?
Well, I just changed committees. So my area of specialization now is on the Ways and Means Committee. So I'm going to be doing a lot of tax, healthcare, and also things that have to do with some really complex issues like trade, and really focusing on economic growth.
Prior to going into politics, you were a homicide detective for the Chicago Police Department. How has that experience shaped your safety issues?
Well, having seen the violence on the streets that I did and what impact it has to families and particularly parents and other family members that are also victims when a tragedy happens like that, you have to understand how it affects our communities, the reasons for those, whether it's the lack of jobs in a community, drugs, gangs, and try to understand as a legislator and as a congressman what we have to do in order to alleviate some of these conditions so we can bring down the amount of violence in our society.
In 2012, you were instrumental in authoring the Jobs Act. You're a Republican, and yet President Obama signed it into law. How gratifying was that?
Well, what was fascinating about getting the Jobs Act done, it was a series of different ideas on how to get small businesses capital and give them the chance to grow. And it ended up coming together because I was a freshman at that time. I didn't know better. I kept going to different Democrat offices saying, hey, we have this idea to do crowdfunding or this idea to finance small businesses. And I guess because we were all talking together, it came together sort of organically.
What are some of the differences between being a representative and a senator?
Well, the first one, as a senator, has a 6-year term. That's a wonderful thing. You don't have to run every 2 years. But in the Senate also this week, right before the inauguration, we're very busy vetting the president's nominees for his cabinet. That's a responsibility only the Senate has, not the House. Approving federal judges, the president's cabinet, ambassadors to foreign countries. Those are things that the Senate does and not the House. And also the Senate, because it requires 60 votes to move legislation, you work across the aisle more. Republicans and Democrats have to work together more in the Senate, and frankly, I like that.
You're a member of the House Armed Services Committee. What's the biggest threat to our way of life?
Well, I think it's always the water on the inside of the ship that sinks it. I think probably the biggest threat to our way of life is if we would forget who we are as Americans, we would forget the constitutional foundations of the nation, because then no matter how strong our security apparatus is, we can't save the country.
A couple of weeks ago, you were sworn in as a member of the 115th freshman class in the House of Representatives. How was that experience?
It was really a different experience for me in life. You start to, once you raise your hand, and towards the end of it, actually, the swearing in, there was all of a sudden I felt this upheaval in my chest because I understood now the tremendous responsibility I was partaking in. And it's a responsibility to help move America forward, but also to help out the future of the youth of America and make sure our families are strong and make sure our country is secure.
You grew up on a cattle ranch in Snowflake. Now, I'm not sure what kind of chores you had there, but I'm guessing at some point you did some pretty nasty cleanup work. Now, while you were shoveling stuff, did you ever in your wildest dreams think you'd become a United States Senator?
Never. In fact, I was in my hometown just last week in Flake, where I grew up, and visited the barn and where I shoveled a lot of manure and milked cows just about every morning in my life. So I never thought I would be doing this. And sometimes I feel like I'm shoveling manure. It's just a different kind.